In February of 1971, in the quiet Northumberland market town of Hexham, two children were digging in their back garden. There was nothing remarkable about the afternoon. The sky was the pale, indifferent grey of a northern winter, and the soil was heavy with recent damp, clinging to their hands and the spade with the stubbornness only English earth seems to possess. They were not searching for treasure. They were not following a map or chasing folklore. They were simply children digging for the sake of digging. The spade struck something solid. At first they assumed it was a stone, the kind that sits half buried and immovable. But when they cleared the dirt away with their hands, what emerged was not a shapeless rock. It was a face, roughly carved, small enough to fit in two hands. They unearthed a second, not far from the first. Two stone heads, each about the size of a large orange. Their features blunt and primitive, yet unmistakably deliberate. One appeared masculine, with heavier brows and a flattened mouth. The other, slightly narrower, seemed feminine in its shaping, though no detail was fine enough to be certain. They carried them inside with the casual pride of discovery, presenting them as one might present an unusual shell or an oddly shaped branch. At first, the objects were curiosities. Neighbours were invited to look. They were passed around, weighed, turned beneath the kitchen light. Someone joked that they looked ancient. Someone else said they looked as though they had been carved by a board mason on his lunch break. They were set aside on a shelf in the living room. The house returned to normal. Or so it seemed. It is difficult to pinpoint the exact moment when atmosphere shifts in a home, because atmosphere does not slam doors or overturn furniture in its early stages. It alters the way silence behaves. It thickens the air slightly in rooms that once felt neutral. Within days of bringing the heads inside, the Robson daughters began to notice that nighttime felt different. Their bedroom was an ordinary shared space. Two narrow beds, floral wallpaper fading at the seams, a wardrobe that creaked in complaint whenever opened. The landing outside was dim at night, illuminated faintly by the glow from downstairs if the light had been left on. The first sound was scratching, soft, intermittent, easily dismissed. Branches brushing brick, perhaps, a loose tile shifting in the wind. But the scratching did not come from the window side of the room. It came from the hallway, right outside their door. A slow drag downward against wood. Then stillness. The next night it returned, louder this time, accompanied by something else, a low vibration that seemed less like movement and more like a presence. The younger sister whispered her sister's name into the dark. Neither of them rose to investigate. They lay frozen, listening, their ears straining against the quiet. Then came the growl. It was not sharp or sudden. It did not resemble a dog's warning bark. It was deeper than that. Sustained, resonant, a sound that seemed to travel through the floorboards rather than across them. The growl lasted several seconds, then stopped abruptly. When the bedside lamp was switched on, the hallway beyond the door was empty. Their parents dismissed it gently. Houses make sounds. Wind travels oddly through vents. Children's imaginations are quick to collaborate with shadows. But the girls knew the difference between a house settling and something breathing. The sounds grew bolder. Heavy footsteps crossed the landing after midnight on more than one occasion. Deliberate, measured steps that began at one end and ended near the girls' door, where they paused as though considering. One night the older sister woke without knowing why. There had been no sound loud enough to disturb her. No bang, no cry. She simply opened her eyes and saw something standing between the beds. At first it was only a distortion in darkness, a shape that did not belong. But as her eyes adjusted, the outline clarified. It was tall, taller than her father, broad-shouldered, its silhouette uneven, as though covered in coarse hair that broke the clean edge of the shadow. Its arms hung long, too long, nearly reaching its knees. Its head tilted slightly forward. The face was indistinct, yet there was a suggestion of a muzzle, an elongated shape where a human face should have been. The eyes did not glow. They reflected faint light, just enough to confirm it was looking at her. She tried to scream. No sound emerged. The air seemed thick, heavy in her lungs. The figure did not advance. It did not bare teeth. It did not make a noise. It simply watched. Then, as quietly as it appeared, it stepped backward into darkness and was gone. She did not sleep again that night. When morning came and she told her parents, her description did not waver under questioning. The details remained consistent. Height, posture. That consistency unsettled them more than hysteria would have. Within days, the youngest sister reported seeing movement at the door. Not the full figure, but a shape passing the frame, large enough that it could not be mistaken for either parent. The growling continued, sometimes outside the door, sometimes inside the room, low and close to the wardrobe. The parents began leaving the hallway light on. It did not deter whatever moved. The final night before the heads were removed was the worst. The growling began earlier than usual. The footsteps paced the landing for nearly a minute. Then came the unmistakable sound of the door handle turning slowly, deliberately downward. It did not rattle, it did not jerk. It depressed fully, released, then again, and again, 3 times. The girls held hands under their blankets, breath shallow. Then silence. Heavy silence. And then, beside the bed, an exhale. Close. Measured. When morning came, the decision was made. The heads were removed from the house. The disturbances did not cease instantly, but they diminished quickly, as though whatever had been present was withdrawn. One name frequently associated with the case is Dr. Anne Ross, an expert in Celtic archaeology and folklore. Ross examined the heads and believed they could resemble Celtic cult objects. The heads were later kept by writer Frank Graham. He did not expect what followed. Placed in his study among books and papers, the heads sat inert for several days. He examined them under lamplight, tracing the carving marks, noting the texture of sandstone, considering whether they resembled Celtic ritual heads described in old accounts of head cults. The ancient belief that the human head contained a soul, that carved likenesses could act as vessels. He did not believe in haunted objects. Not really. Late one evening, while reading alone, he became aware of a low vibration in the room. Not quite sound, not quite sensation, but something that seemed to exist in the space just beneath hearing. When he lowered his book, it ceased. Days later, he heard footsteps on the landing outside his study. Heavy, measured, back and forth. When he opened the door, nothing was there. One night, as he lay in bed, he felt the air change. Not colder, but denser. He opened his eyes. At the foot of his bed stood a shape, tall, broad, its outline broken by rough texture. Arms hanging long, head slightly inclined. The same posture described by the Robson girl. It did not move toward him. It did not growl. It simply stood in silence, as though confirming something. Then it receded into shadow. Visitors to his house reported unease. One heard a growl from the hallway. Another refused to remain in the study after dusk. One of the heads fell from a stable cabinet one night without explanation. When they were eventually placed in storage, the disturbances ceased. And then the Hexham heads vanished. No official record of their current location. No museum display. Gone. The Robson family moved on with their lives. The researcher returned to quieter studies. The figure was not seen again, but the question remains. If the heads were crude modern carvings, why did the experiences replicate so closely in two separate homes? If the disturbances were imagination, why did adults report the same shape, the same posture, the same silence? And if something was attached to those objects, why were they buried? Sometimes the most unsettling stories are not the violent ones. They are the quiet ones. The ones that unfold in ordinary houses, beneath ordinary ceilings, where children lie awake listening to something breathe just outside the door. Two small stone faces, unearthed from English soil, returned to shadow, and somewhere, perhaps, still waiting.